Our next amazing toy talk is with 2010 ACTFL National Language Teacher of the Year, Lilley.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hearing. That's something I always took for granted. And I've only become better at hearing what teachers have to say through a detour in my own career path. 6 years ago, right here in San Diego, I was named the ACTFL 2010 National Language Teacher of the Year. I was thrilled and greatly honored by that designation. But I never would have dreamed that 6 years later, I would not be in my own classroom. You see, I've had to deal with a hereditary pattern hearing loss. I probably acquired it from my father, and I feel really bad when I look back on all the times that my siblings and myself refused to repeat things for him. He would ask us to say things again, and we would turn to him with an adolescent not repeating. And you know what they say about payback, though. So I've had to, if I look back on where I was 6 years ago, I can see, though, that I did have symptoms, but I was clearly in denial. And I was able to explain away a lot of it as just the difficulties in dealing with novice language learners who we know are very soft-spoken, right? When they're talking, they're trying out the new sounds and the patterns of a language. And so that's something that they hold back on. They're hesitant. And probably like many of you, I always had a classroom that had rumbling pipes overhead, loud radiator, and air conditioning units. But the job got harder and harder to do. And I finally had to face the reality and make a decision to change things up quite a bit. And so I had to retool and took the job as an International Baccalaureate Middle Years Program Coordinator. That means I'm still in the high school that I was working in before, but I'm also assigned to a middle school in a role of support to teachers. And by changing jobs, though, it still wasn't enough. It was a little bit easier to be in an office a lot of part of the day in front of a computer screen. But over time, I was just like my dad, asking people to repeat things. And I know their patience was wearing out with me. So I finally had to get real. I had to seek correction. And I do pretty well. Although large rooms like this can still be hard for me. Some things are amplified more than they should be. Other things are very, very soft. But I will tell you, it's nothing compared to working 8th grade lunch supervision, where you can almost see the sound bouncing off the walls. And as a result, I've been able to take some tips out of that to be able to adjust and accommodate. So I'm still in the high school that I taught in before, but I'm also in a middle school. The high school has about a 40% free and reduced rate of students for lunch. The middle school is a Title I school. We're about 80% free and reduced. And schools that service students in high poverty have to provide some additional services. We do the federal program of breakfast in the classroom so that all kids can start the day with some food in their stomach in order to be able to think. We also send kids home on the weekend with backpacks full of food to help some of their struggling families get through the weekend. And kids who come from that type of environment don't often come to school with the respect for education. They're not hearing that at home. So they can come in and be quite difficult. They can be hard to work with. And what I've noticed in working in my capacity with teachers is that there are really two different camps of teachers. There are those who will grumble about the students in a voice so loud that I don't need my hearing aids to be able to pick up on that. And yet there's this other group who work with that same population of students who are thriving, and their students are thriving. And I've wondered about it. What's the difference? What makes that happen when we've got two different groups of students dealing with the same populations of students? So it set me off into looking at what efficacy is about. And often the work to look at the academic definition that we have up here, the work of Bunder is often cited in his research. And when we think about efficacy in the terms of teacher efficacy, it really boils down to the idea of whether or not I view my ability as a teacher to have an impact on my students' learning. There are teachers who view that idea of being able to impact their students, and there are teachers who feel that they don't have that ability for various reasons. Now, efficacy is not just limited to education. We also see it in industry. Henry Ford looked around at what he was doing, and he was able to put it in more simple terms. You know, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're probably right. So I want to talk to you and explore this idea of teacher efficacy by sharing the stories of two different teachers. The first one I'm going to talk to you about is not a world language teacher, but I don't think we should make that mistake of only looking to our own disciplines. I think we can learn things from other disciplines and vice versa. So I want to talk to you about Jason. He is a 6th grade science teacher in our middle school. And he was a person who came into teaching after a different career path. He was the son of a father who was career military, and the family would change schools about every 2 years to follow their father's pathway in the Army. And it became very difficult for him changing schools, especially as adolescence set in. It made it hard to form friendships and certainly to have connections with teachers. So when it came time for high school graduation, although he's a very smart man, at that time, he had a very low sense of self-efficacy, and he did not see himself as college material. He quite honorably followed in his father's footsteps by pursuing a stint in the military. After that, he went to work in the Missouri Highway Department, and ultimately came to us to become not only a science teacher, because that's an area of which he really enjoys and has an interest in, but more importantly, to try to make an impact and connection with those very hard-to-reach students, those students like himself who did not see themselves as being educational successes. And we're very grateful that he made that decision to come to us in education. Now, what the takeaway for us is that if you were to walk in his classroom, and I spend quite a bit of time in there observing and seeing what's going on in there, Jason really understands this idea, that the kids that he's trying to connect with the most are the ones who are most likely to let him down. But you're not going to see that in evidence. And I think that what he does is something that very, very simple approach, but can work for all of us in managing what's going on in our classrooms. I've been in his classroom, and I've seen him get really frustrated with kids who maybe aren't responding the way he might like. He might be frustrated in the sense of maybe somebody did something kind of squirrely, as middle school students do. And I can read that in his body language just because I'm a teacher and an adult and I've seen this type of thing. But I don't think the students can at all pick up on his frustration. And they certainly would never see or hear it in his voice or in the words that he has chosen. What Jason quite simply does is I've seen him take a step back, regroup, take 2 seconds to get himself centered, and then very calmly phrase the problem to the student and get that in simple terms so they can start to identify it and start to work on the solution. He understands that behind those bad behaviors, there's usually just a kid with a story, and there's something that needs to be understood in order to move forward. The other teacher I'm going to tell you about is my colleague Adele, who we lost just about a week ago. And I told her family that I wanted to honor her memory. I'm going to try to be strong here by talking about some of the things that Adele did to impact me as a teacher. Adele, and besides having a command of the Spanish language, she had some magic words I'm going to tell you about in just a moment. We would travel to many conferences over the years, many ACTFL conferences, and I had a memory of her this morning of how we would come back from our sessions, a full day of sessions, and at night we would lay our handouts out on the bed. Those are the days when we tended to get more paper copies of things and the things on electronic format like today. But we would have discussions about all the ideas that we had learned that day, and it helped me to shape me as a teacher, and I'll share a little bit more about that in just a moment. But Adele had this almost permanent smile etched on her face, a very gentle demeanor. She was a Spanish 1 teacher that you want for your department because she built that strong foundation. Students left her and they loved the language. They left her classrooms with a strong foundation to be successful as they went along with their pathway to proficiency. And Adele, though, had hard students. Now, lest we think that those difficult students are limited only to Title I schools, they exist everywhere, right? The school we taught in, Adele was across the hall from me for almost the 15 years that I was at one particular high school. And it was a complete opposite of the Title I school in which we find ourselves now. But we still had difficult students, and we probably had some kids who felt a great sense of entitlement that kind of spurred some of the difficulties along a little bit further. But Adele, like Jason, kept any frustrations in check. And she made a very conscious decision to never try to call a student out directly in the classroom. She would wait until a break in the activity. Or worst case scenario, she would ask one of the students to invite the student to wait for her outside in the hall. That was probably the worst punishment of anything, when this very nice lady is asking you to step out and wait for her to talk to you. All kinds of things are going through their minds before she came out and just simply used some magic words. Now, they're not secret words. These are probably words that you all already use or know of, but they're magic in the power that they have. She would take that student aside and she would quite simply say this: "Help me understand why. Help me understand why you chose not to participate in our activities today. Help me understand why you said something that I took as being kind of disrespectful to me, or perhaps to another student." The power of those words is that they've suddenly put the ball in the court of the student. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to respond. And they're going to tell the story about why they were acting the way in which they had. And again, just like Jason, kids know that behind every kid that's acting out, there's usually a story. And the simple way to try to solve those things is try to get to the heart of that story. A simple technique, but it allows you to pick up on things that maybe are going on personally with the student that you never would have known about. It takes you away from that pointing a finger at a student that we know just doesn't really work. It's taken me a long time to embrace those simple words. My first reaction was always just to react, to get frustrated, to start accusing the student. And the power of these words, though, is transformative. So if you know them already, continue with them. You know that they work. If it's something new, try them out, and I think you'll see some real power in them. Additionally, though, with what Adele brought to me as being a great mentor, in those conversations we would have at night after our sessions about what we'd learned during the day, it really helped shape my view of what it is to have engagement in the classroom. And I think that when we have engagement, we don't have behavior problems. And I look at engagement really as 4 different elements that make up, if I look at the very, very best lessons that I have taught, that others teach, I think there are 4 elements that come into play. First, that they're personalized. We have activities that topics that kids love to talk about. They want to express the things that they're interested in. They want to learn what their peers are interested in. They want to talk about things going on in the school culture. They want to talk about things going on in popular culture. And not enough can be said about the importance of variety of presentation. That if we keep things fresh, certainly kids need routines and structures, and they need to know what the expectations are. But if no 2 days really look alike, that they come in and maybe one day we're heavy with cooperative learning structures. Maybe there's another day when we're heavy on bringing in technology. Maybe manipulatives come into play. That it keeps the things fresh. And I think that freshness is what really staves off a lot of problems. I would rather have spent hours and hours on lesson planning than even spending 5 minutes dealing with a behavior issue. The other thing, it's kind of tied into being personalized, but it's the idea of meaningful activities. That things have meaning, they're not just doing work for work's sake. And we're in a time where authentic resources provide such a great gateway for our students to be able to connect with the greater world out there, to be reading, to be viewing the same things that native speakers and the target language, the target culture are looking at. And they are motivating. They keep kids engaged, and when they're engaged, they're not causing us those management issues. And finally, when I would look at my own lessons that didn't work the way I wanted them, usually the simple thing of movement was lacking. And movement doesn't have to be a really grandiose, structured type of thing. It can certainly just be as simple as having students stand up while they're doing some type of an activity. It could be as simple as having them come up and pick up their papers instead of having them passed out. We're at the end of almost 2 days, maybe in some cases longer, of sitting in chairs, listening. And we know how hard it is on us. We know how tiring that is. And we are adults with a lot more choices. Our students don't have those choices. So it's something that is upon us to try to look for those ways to build in movement. And those 4 items, they're there because it's a 4-legged stool. In the very best lesson, you'll find all 4. But you know, that stool will still be there on 3 legs. They don't all have to be there to work. It might be a little bit wobbly, but 2 of those will work. But if you really want to work towards the best engagement I find just my own experience and in talking with my mentor over the years, these are things that can help us out. And why is it important? Well, teachers want to be successful. They want to feel like they're making successful connections with students. They want to feel that they're having successful interactions with their colleagues. They want to feel that their work is meaningful, that it makes a difference. There's a lot of things out of our control, and when teachers shout out what it is that they need, a lot of the things that they're shouting about, we can't take care of. But a really simple suggestion, it's for us to be like Dorothy. Now, in The Wizard of Oz, there were really two Dorothys. There was a Dorothy who was caught up in the dark, black and white, swirling vortex of problems. And then there was a Dorothy who chose to open the door into the glittering, brilliant Technicolor world. And I think that's what efficacy really comes down to, is how we choose to view things. And I'm going to challenge us to think about that Technicolor world. We all have had our bad days, our bad weeks, our bad semesters. I can remember a time when I had a semester of classes that none of them were really going quite the way I wanted them to. But I made a challenge to go to bed at night thinking of at least one good thing that happened, particularly in that fourth block lunch class, that they were just wilder as all get out. And I'll be honest, it was hard a lot of times to come up with one positive. But as I got into that, it became easier to think of 2 and even 3 things that went well during that day. And a curious thing happened. By the end of the semester, that really troublesome class became my very favorite one. It's that idea of which way we choose to view things. And again, why is that important? Well, I don't need to shout out what we're hearing about a shortage in our profession. If we look at statistics, we know it's a grave situation. And the sad thing is, programs are being cut not because the lack of interest. In fact, the interest is higher in language learning than it ever has been. But we're losing programs because we can't find teachers to fill those spots. Show of hands, how many of you personally know of a program that's been threatened or cut due to not being able to find a teacher? And that's a tragedy. It's a hard, complex problem to solve, but I think I'm going to offer a simple solution to what we can do. And I'm going to suggest that we get better at leaning in, that we really try to lean in to hear what our colleagues are saying that they need. We're going to have to understand that we're going to have programs, if we have our programs to survive across the country the way that we need to be growing, we're going to have colleagues come to us who don't always have the strongest language skills. We're going to have colleagues come into our profession who don't always have the best classroom management techniques. We're going to have colleagues who don't have a solid grounding of what it is to teach for proficiency. But instead of criticizing, we're going to have to find ways to support, to lean in, and to grow them. The irony of my situation is that I think, in spite of my hearing loss, I think I can hear better than ever what teachers are saying that they need in our profession. I think we are, as being a field based on communication, we need to get stronger in our interpersonal mode of hearing what we're saying to one another. To look to teachers like Jason, to look to teachers like Adele for the wonderful example that they gave us in being able to find simple solutions to get through to even the toughest of kids. We need to be on a continuous path to find ways to keep our kids engaged in our classrooms, to keep our classroom teaching fresh with the idea of helping our kids get to greater gains in proficiency. We need to be like Dorothy, opening that door to the brilliant, beautiful world of what it is to be language educators. And I will challenge you to leave here with the idea of doing a better job of leaning in, finding those ways to support one another. Again, so that we can be like Dorothy, not opening a door that leads just to Oz, but even better. Languages matter, and you have the really, really important job of opening the doors of the world to our students through language learning. Thank you.